to we're going to jump into what I tried to jump in too early a moment ago, and that is Chris Van Maren is here from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. He's in the Region 4 office in Stamford, so he's kind of our local guy. He's the fisheries manager and very much engaged in Upper Delaware River tailwater fisheries. So now we're coming back into focus in the upper river. I will say that the last three presentations, I hope one of the take-home messages from Jennifer and Amy and Paul and Kristen is to understand protection of the tailwaters is you also really need to understand the watershed wide perspective of what's going on with all the issues that were addressed. And I hope that that penetrated for members of the audience who are less familiar with what it takes to protect the fishery and the tailwater in the area that's most concerning to most of our audience. So with that, Chris, if you are here, Chris is here to talk about two things. One, the state of New York put together a trout plan. Last year, many of you were engaged in that in one way or another, public comments following along. And there's an interesting study that's Chris is undertaking in the tailwaters related to the trout plan. And also, Chris, the 3-year joint fisheries investigation plan, that's with the state of Pennsylvania. I think that's unprecedented that the two state environmental agencies got together, take a close look at our tailwaters, and Chris is here to update you on both of those. So, Chris, I don't know if you have a PowerPoint, but if you do, it's all yours and you can jump right in.
All right, can you guys hear me okay? I was hearing some crackling earlier.
Yep.
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right, I'm going to try to share my screen here. Okay, you guys see, I'm gonna put it on presentation view here. Okay, you see that okay?
Yep, that looks right. Thanks.
What, I have another person that's the PA person that's coming up on this time slot. When do you guys want me to try to wrap this up by?
Hey, Chris, actually the PA presentation, Jennifer and I are going to do it. It's abbreviated. So we break for lunch at noon. So you have, the better portion of half an hour here. So.
Okay, so I've got two different PowerPoints here. The first one, as Jeff mentioned, is to show you a study related to addressing the concerns that anglers had with our catch and release season that was implemented as part of the statewide inland trout stream management plan. So statewide now, for all the different management categories, angling is open for catch and release fishing from October 16th through the end of March, based on concerns that we had from anglers related to how that may impact recruitment. We've devised this study. So I'm just going to go over that here for the first 15 minutes. So the objectives of the study, first off, we want to estimate the angling pressure on a statewide sample of streams, or reaches, I should say, in this fall period. Determine if the angling pressure on these wild stream reaches during the catch and release season negatively impacts the young of the year production. And then also assess whether or not there's localized differences amongst the reaches. Are the tailwaters different than, say, something out in Western New York? So the actions that we have as far as the study, first we had to select the different reaches, and we selected from one of the 3 wild categories from the Inland Trout Stream Management Plan. In Region 4, we selected 1 wild quality and 2 wild premiers, the wild quality being the bushkill, wild premier being the tailwater section of the East Branch, and the tailwater section of the West Branch. The next part of the actions is, we conduct the angler pressure survey. That's going to happen over 3 years. It happens from October 16th through December 15th. We're also going to be doing young of the year abundance surveys via electrofishing. That happens for 4 years. So we got this year as part of our baseline assessment. And that's late August, early September. We're also installing thermographs, temperature loggers on at least one study reach per region to get that data to see how that compares as far as another variable that may impact young of the year. And then our plan is to have a report completed by the end of 2024. So just break that down a little bit. The reach selection, you know, again, we're looking at one of those three management categories: the wild, wild quality, or wild premier. The reaches must attract a significant amount of angler use in that period, potentially. You know, there has to be an opportunity to catch large, mature trout. There has to be, you know, easy public access, ideally proximity to a population center. That wasn't necessarily the case for Region 4, but, you know, it's proximity to sort of destination fisheries, of course. Reaches must accommodate angler counts that can be readily completed from the road or vantage points accessible within a short walk from a vehicle. For Region 4, where, you know, most of it's all just drive-by, we're going to get out of the vehicle briefly at certain vantage points to look up and down the stream, but on average, the reaches that we selected are viewable via the car. Reaches must afford agents the ability to reasonably conduct 2 count runs per day. We're struggling, quite honestly. We're going to have very long days to get the 3 reaches that we selected done in it one day, but we're going to. And the reaches must include spawning young of the year habitat that can be effectively sampled via the backpack shocking. With angler pressure estimates, we're going to do 2 count runs per day, and, you know, one sometime after 9, and then one closer to sunset. And then we're doing 1 weekend day and 1 weekday per week. Estimates of angling effort during the sampling period will be, you know, all the estimates will be done in accordance with the standards from Pollock, Jones, and Brown. And then Fred Henson at our central office will be doing the summaries. The young of the year, relative abundance estimates. Again, with sampling in late August, early September, of this year, we completed those. We did have some challenges based on weather. That's why we try to create, you know, a window such that it's not something we're going to say it's always going to be done a certain week of the year. You know, especially this year with a lot of rain, it was hard to do. So there are 2 depletion passes per reach, collecting trout only, targeting young of the year. There's no blocker seen. We count all trout, measure a sample of at least 25 young of the year, and all yearlings or older trout to the nearest millimeter. Return to the water after the final pass. Determine young of the year status based on sample length frequency, and then estimate abundance, survey data, and report the CPUE, the catch per unit effort, and site-specific population estimates via the binomial depletion model. So that was kind of very detailed as far as the actual study design. The schedule, basically, you know, as I mentioned before, we select the reaches, put in the thermographs in June. The young of the year assessment is end of August, or, you know, second half of August to the first half of September. Creel is going to be consistently always October 16th through December 15th. So that affords us 9 weekend days and 9 weekdays. Then reporting it to Fred. So that's pretty much what we're doing each year. You know, starting next year, we'll make sure that we evaluate to make sure there aren't any changes needed in the methodology. But then pretty much we repeat. 22, 23, again, we repeat. 24, we repeat except for without the counts. We're just repeating the young of the year sampling. And then by 2025, we'll have the report done. So this is specific to Region 4 here. This is the East Branch. You can see the start and end of the run. That weird little P icon got manipulated when I switched it, or when we switched it to an image here, but those funny hand-drawn P's are where we're actually doing the backpack electrofishing for the young of the year. So this just described the process here. So we start at downfill the covered bridge. There we get out of the vehicle, look up and downstream, and then we continue along 30. As we're driving, we're counting. If there's areas where we need to slow down, obviously we do. We're not going to just rely on how fast we can count as we're driving 55. Corbett Bridge is also another spot where we look up and downstream, then continue on 30, and then Thayer Hollow, likewise going to look up and downstream as Shinhoppel, but just upstream at that point because the reach ends at Shinhoppel Bridge. For the West Branch, starts at Route 8, goes down to just a few miles south of Hell Eddy there. Again, we've got the 3 electrofishing sites there identified with that funny P shape. So again, we've got viewing spots here. The Route 8 bridge, look up and downstream, continue along Laurel Bank Road. Pine Street Bridge, look up and downstream, continue on Laurel Bank Ave again. And Men's Club parking area, get out and look up and downstream there, continue down Airport Road, then look from the launch at Airport Road. Then we're going to take River Road and continue along backside to River El Eddy, look up and downstream, and then continue down Falconer Road to the New York border water. For the Bushkill, it's pretty much this reach along 28 from Fleshman's to Arkville. We're starting at the Fleshman Town Park, looking up and downstream, continuing on 28. There's a bridge on 28 that we're going to do the same. The vehicle and look up and downstream, and then also at the Arkville train station. So that's specific to Region 4. I don't know, do you want to do questions for this study first and then go into the overall study? Do you want to?
Chris, why don't you just keep going? We'll bunch all the questions at the end.
Okay. Let me pull up the other presentation. Okay, how's that look? So as Jeff had mentioned, we've been working on this actually since 2017. We did some sort of preliminary data. The formal reporting process or report will include the years of 2018 through 2020. We're working on finalizing the reports right now. As Jeff mentioned, this is a joint plan between, or joint study, I should say, between New York and PA. The scope, we've done this presentation a number of years, so I'm sort of going over some of the highlights that we found, but just to remind you that the scope is pretty much the tailwaters as you'd expect it down to Callicoon. Although, for the most part, we focused on the West Branch for a lot of the stuff. We did some stuff in the East Branch and the main stem. We did, a fair number of the tributaries as well. So there's 4 main parts to this study. There's the creel survey, the pit tags study, the red counts, and the electrofishing data. So, given the amount of time I have here, I'm just going to sort of cherry-picked off like some highlights from each one of those 4 components, just to share with you guys and sort of talk about our next step as far as the management plan. So here's one of the highlights from the creel survey. This slide just shows that effort was concentrated primarily around 2 o'clock. That was the highlight as far as the peak effort. I think that sort of relates a lot to hatching timing. and, and timing as far as, fly fishing. The slide also talks about, the creel survey showed that there was approximately, well, from the anglers that we interviewed, there was 2,645 brown trout caught, only 67 harvested, so that equates to about 2.5%. Conversely, for rainbows, there were 709 caught, 9 harvested, which represents 1%. This red line on the graph shows where 1/3 of the harvest. So initially, there was a lot of concern that there was harvest early in the morning, potentially from folks that live locally that were maybe getting out before work, et cetera. We found that about 1/3 of the harvest occurred in the morning hours. So these graphs depict the catch rates of browns and rainbows. The orange bars are the same for both graphs and depict the number of interviews per river. Note the scale changes, and it's much smaller for the rainbow graph. The catch rates are not great, but compare them to what we typically define as a target. Typically, we're trying to target at least a half fish per hour, but I think a lot of this has to do with a function of the amount of effort, and also just sort of the style of fishing. The highest catch rate was via wading for browns. There's a lot on these graphs. I don't know, since this is recorded, hopefully people, if they wanted to go into it in more detail, can look at these at a future time. For every creel survey, we do a sort of satisfaction and other sort of generic kind of questions. And what we found for the tailwater study is that 3/4 of all anglers were either satisfied or very satisfied with their fishing experience over the last 3 years. Is how the question was stated. And then we were trying to figure out, as far as a management objective, what was driving satisfaction. So this other table here, this graph, depicts, what they favored. So the first bar is for, catching a lot of trout. Second versus large trout. Third is what we consider a trophy trout, a 20-inch or greater, versus, what they felt was driving the satisfaction maybe being harvest or unknown. So as you can see here, it looks like most people are interested in catching large fish. That seems to be what drives their satisfaction in the system. Okay, so onto the red counts. This is just a big summary slide here. It was a joint effort between volunteers and the agencies. FUDR coordinated a volunteer effort into the tributaries, and New York State DEC and PA tried to conduct red counts in the main stems. So on average, we had 933 brown reds per year in the West Branch, 461 in the East Branch. For the tributaries, and this was not, the whole tributaries, it's just a smaller section towards the mouth of the tribs. We had 48 browns per year and 54 rainbows per year in the tribs as far as the red counts. We did not get main stem rainbow red counts in any of the years based on flows. So there's still some question marks as to whether or not the rainbows rely on the tribs or if they're utilizing the main stems as do the browns. For the electrofishing, I've got 4 slides in a row here that I'm going to show that look at the size structure as you move from Laurel Bank down to Sheehawken on the West Branch. So can you guys see my cursor, my pointer?
Yes, we can.
overall, you've got a, I mean, so we're starting off in 2017. Again, on average, we try to start earlier than June, but in 2017, we didn't get started until June. And the other years we had either started in April or May. The sort of big picture that I want to present to these next 4 slides is the size structure on average is really sort of skewed towards larger fish. On average, we had at least 30% of the catch that was greater than 16 inches. It's pretty unheard of. I mean, it's really sort of speaks to the potential of this system to be a trophy fishery. So, I just wanted to show that graphically here. As you can see here, like Laurel Bank had, at least in 2017, we'll focus mostly on the browns here just because we have better data or more data. It was skewed a little bit towards, having more smaller fish. As you got in 2017 at least, you got more bigger fish as you went further down. So this is 2018. Here it's pretty much every size class increased as you went downstream. The reason that we do these long-term monitorings is because we do have such variability from year to year as far as our ability to sample and different flows, et cetera. So, you have to sort of look at these and as the reports will depict, they identify, our ability to sample in different conditions. So each year doesn't, what we show on these graphs doesn't necessarily represent exactly what's in the system. It represents what we're able to catch. So the value of long-term data sets is you'll be able to sort of look at trends as opposed to, getting into specific sort of one-year incidents. Ideally we can look at, at least a 3-year trend before we would have to, get too reactionary. So again, that's 18, here's 19. 19 shows a little bit different, shows a little bit more smaller fish in the system. It's again just focusing on browns. And then 20 gets back to a very even distribution, or in a sense, even would be more of what we saw in 19. That's more typical. What you'd see in a system, you'd have higher numbers for smaller fish. When you see something like this, it's very atypical to have, in a sense, an even distribution across the size classes. For the pit tag survey, so I'm not going into the methodology, but we tagged nearly 5,000 brown trout, 500 rainbows, 40 of the 1,163 unique recaps from the tagged fish were captured at a site other than the original tagging site. So that speaks to the fact that the fish were not moving significantly. There had been a radiotelemetry study done a long time ago, I believe it was in the 90s, where there was more movement identified. Our pit tagging study did not really show that. And we tried to set up arrays to assess movement into the tributaries, arrays basically a wire across the bed of the tributary to catch the tag as the fish either went in or immigrated or emigrated into the tributaries. They weren't particularly effective, honestly, because of flows, et cetera. But we didn't find a ton of movement into the tribs as well. I mean, there was some movement, as you would expect, towards spawning season. So yeah, I mean, part of what we determined through that system with the arrays was that, at least for brown trout, we didn't think that the tribs were as important to recruitment. Again, though, we're not really sure yet relating to the rainbows. So as I mentioned, our next step really is we're finalizing the report right now. And then we're going to create a management plan. Yeah, so the work that we've done establishes the base that will, the baseline that will afford the DEC and PA the ability to develop a comprehensive fisheries management plan for the tailwaters. It will also provide a transparent means to work with the public to devise strategies within that plan to facilitate the appropriate recreational use and stewardship of the tailwater. And lastly, the plan will serve as an anchor for adaptive management actions and research initiatives. That plan ideally is going to be done, at least a draft, by the end of this year. And we will get that on our website for public comment. It'll be up for public comment for, I think, 30 days. I can send, that link to you guys or to UDR, that, so it can be sent out via your listserv and made more public. For that, I will take some questions.
Thanks very much, Chris. I'm actually going to ask you one that you just touched on. Peter Kolazar is wondering if you could say more about why the size distribution is the way it was, and in a natural environment, what should the size distribution be?
So typically in a natural system, or in most systems, I should say, you're going to have more smaller fish just because of mortality events, whether it's angling or other sources of mortality. It's just the natural way. You've got fish that produce, hundreds or thousands of eggs in order to sort of account for their ability for the adults to become the next breeders. So, I mean, a natural sort of population curve would be to have, a lot of smaller fish and diminishing as you get older. So when you see an even distribution like that, it's somewhat rare, and I think here it has a lot to do with catch and release and just the habitat quality, frankly. There's, obviously with the tailwaters and the cold water releases, it affords a lot more staying power and potentially less mortality.
Okay, so the next question about this presentation, I think it's about this presentation. Sorry, I'm trying to scroll to the top of this. I may have missed something in the slide, but why did you not include naturally reproducing rainbow trout along with brook trout and brown trout in your reach selection? Oh, so sorry, this is about the previous presentation. In the reach selection slide, bullet point 1.
So so for region 4, we didn't do, so it was either going to be the statewide plan that central office put together was either going to be either be brook trout or brown trout. In region 4, we didn't have really a candidate for the brook trout that made sense, and we had more of a need for, the assessment for the tailwaters and the bushkill, or the bushkill represents the reservoir fish spawning run. So yeah, I mean, the rainbow trout was not included. That was sort of a central office decision, and it's always, based on practicality and logistics for the study, we focused on either browns or brook trout.
Okay, and I think the last question is there a way groups can coordinate in assisting with the surveys?
With the surveys as far as the angler count? And that's what you're asking?
This is from the first presentation. So I think that this is referring to the survey work that you're about to undertake, that you started in August. Roger Olson, feel free to correct me if I didn't, if I'm misrepresenting what you're saying.
I think Roger's talking about the impact study.
Yeah.
No, I think that we don't really have an avenue for assistance. I mean, it's, we're trying to standardize it across the state, and, as such, Fred has devised this study, and we haven't, there wasn't an allowance for volunteers. It's fairly tight study. We don't have a huge budget for it, so we're basically, keeping, the surveys down to kind of the minimum needed in order to get quality assessment. So, we're putting in, 18 10-hour shifts here just for the counts for that period. Yes, I mean, to answer your question, there wasn't really an allowance set up for, incorporating volunteer data collection.
Okay, well, I think that's all we have right now for questions. I just want to say thank you again. I don't know, Jeff, do you have any parting words? I do know we're going to leave this Zoom on through lunch. So feel free, if you're going to walk away from your computer, just to mute yourself and turn off your camera. And then when you come back, you can just turn those, turn your camera back on. But we'll be all set up. So.
Yeah, thanks, Molly. And thank you, Chris. And again, I know a lot of information presented in a short amount of time. Thankfully, we're recording this, and if folks need any of the data that's being shared on the chat box, we will have it available to you. We did have another presentation. Jennifer Ord Green, who's the policy director for Mid-Atlantic National Trout Unlimited, and I were going to talk about one related issue to the New York Trout Plan that is still unresolved. Jennifer tried her best, but could not find a Pennsylvania spokesperson. I think she's going to put some links up on the chat box. And that is the issue of the border waters from Monument Pool to Callicoon. And now the state of New York and the state of Pennsylvania have two different harvest limits for trout as a result of the two state. Pennsylvania also did a trout plan, by the way, a statewide trout plan. But as a result of the New York trout plan, the harvest limit for the tailwaters, the Delaware tailwaters, is now one fish any size. That took effect this past spring at the beginning of the 21 season. And Pennsylvania has a different harvest limit on their side of the border waters, which is, I asked Molly to confirm this a moment ago, two trout in the West Branch, minimum 12 inches, one trout in the main stem, minimum 14 inches. So we obviously have these two different harvest limits, and we feel, FUDR and Trout Unlimited feel like, it would be a good idea if the two states were able to harmonize, just to negate confusion, and just as a fisheries management objective, it seems smart to have the same harvest limits on the border waters where the two states touch the river. So that is something that our organizations are actively working on. Jennifer's leading the charge in Pennsylvania. We're keeping New York updated. Pennsylvania has indicated that 2022 might be the earliest date upon which they could change their harvest rules for the Delaware and sync them up with the New York side of things. Jennifer, did I say that right? Is there anything you want to add before we break for lunch?
No, I would just say that the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission has had this spring, they had Daryl Pierce, who is the fisheries management biologist for this area, give an update to the commissioners on the status of the joint fisheries investigation. And as part of the PA trout management plan, Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission is very aware of the issue of kind of this disharmony right now, and has committed to making that change and kind of working to harmonize that in their regulatory spectrum. It takes about 6 months to a year for them to make a regulatory change. So that's all I'd add.
Thank you, Jennifer. More to come on that, and we can answer any questions. Just feel free to contact us. But there's still some work to be done to coordinate the two states on the new harvest limits in New York and existing harvest limits in Pennsylvania on the Delaware tailwater border waters. So with that, we're going to break for lunch.
Dan
has his hand up.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Hi, just one quick question for Chris. Chris, I was fishing this weekend with a couple of pretty knowledgeable guides on the river system. And they did not think that the reach between Lordville and Callicoon followed the same rules as the rest of the Wild Premier reaches. Can you just clarify if that's the case?
Yeah, it should be the case. I'm looking at my regs book right now.
Not Wild Premier, but a regulation.
Yeah, so it's not categorized as wild premier, but there's a special reg that gives it the same regulation.
Okay,
So yes, it is the same.
okay,
And
thank you.
I would like to add to that too, that we also clarified with DEC a few months ago that not only is it the same, but it's not that you can catch one fish above Callicoon and one below. It's one fish anywhere in that section.
Great. Thank you for the clarification. Good question, Dan. So we will break for lunch. People can stay either just, take your screen off, mute yourself, go get something to eat, or dial back in at 1 o'clock for our afternoon session. Thanks, everybody. Hey, Glenn.
How you doing?
Good. Everybody's on lunch break, but there might be people that are unmuted. So I just want to let you know.
Okay.
I've got to drop off. I've got a 12:30 conference call here just with staff to deal with something that popped up. But we are still on for 1 o'clock and look forward to you.
Sounds like a plan.
Okay. Yeah. So if you want to do whatever you want, you can kill your video and mute, and we start back up at 1 o'clock.
Sounds like fun.
Hey, Glenn,
Hey, how you doing, Joseph?
you missed a great morning.
How so?
There's a lot of stuff they went over. A lot of information, but the good news is they're recording it, so you'll be able to watch it at any moment, at your leisure.
At my leisure. So I've got so much leisure these days.
Joe,
Well-
we're actually still recording, so it's great. I think you should eat closer to the camera.
Hold this down because I'm getting in my car down on Long Island and I'm driving up to the Delaware.
You know, when you say great things were happening this morning, I thought maybe we were